This episode contains discussion of violent crime. All persons are presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Some of the events described are based on public records and family accounts and should be treated as allegations, not established fact. Hi, Dark Tourists. If you're listening to this, it's my very first episode ever of Dark Tourism, and I'm Andrea. This is Dark Tourism, The Forgotten Files. This is the unsolved murder of Vicki Silves. In this series, we focus on Washington state cases of missing persons, solved and unsolved murders, cold but active cases, and those cases that did not get the sort of media or law enforcement attention they deserved. This makes covering these stories pretty difficult, but it's important to get the cases out, so maybe some new leads could be generated. Our very first story is about the unsolved murder of 44-year-old Vicki Silves from Concrete, Washington. She was ambushed from behind and left to die in her driveway, in the dark, in the cold of winter. Her story has no leads and remains open. This is the story of Vicki Silves. All right, hi Dark Tourists, thanks for listening. Our first story was brought to my attention through a TikTok direct message. It was a woman who had seen one of my posts about a landmark in a small town, Concrete, Washington, which is pretty close to where I live. And due to the small size of the community, the post spread pretty quickly. And before I knew it, commenters in the community had given me a list of at least 10 mysterious cases of missing and murdered people in this extremely small town, none of which have been solved or widely publicized. So it's kind of mysterious, a little bit scary, and so I wanted to get into this story about Vicki. Before we get too far into it, I want to take some time to describe the area that this murder took place. Again, it's a very small size and close community, and because of that, it exacerbates the frustration that this case couldn't be solved. 2 hours northeast of Seattle, the Cascade Mountains close in around a town called Concrete. This is reached by Highway 90. The area is still wild and has a lot of rivers and lakes surrounding it. I grew up in Washington State, and I would consider Concrete very rural. Most of the people that go to Concrete usually go there to camp or fish at Baker Lake or go hiking. Mostly people just pass through it quickly on Highway 20 on the way to Eastern Washington. It's one of the major routes. Anyway, it's kind of a blip on the map. If you blink, you might miss it. It's just a very small place. About 800 permanent residents. It does have some Hollywood fame that I think is kind of interesting. It was a film location for This Boy's Life. Tobias Wolff is a local author who wrote a memoir about growing up in the 1950s in Marblemount, which is another town that's even smaller than Concrete, but very close to Concrete, so they just sort of moved the location. This book was made into a movie, and Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro starred in it. The old concrete towers still have the lettering that Warner Brothers put up on them for filming in the 90s, which is sort of an aside. But even earlier, the town was settled by pioneers, but before that, the area was inhabited by the upper Skagit tribes, and before it was Concrete, it was a town called Cement City, home to Washington's early cement plants that helped build the dams and bridges of the Northwest. These bridges were instrumental in enhancing the ease of logging, which is important for this story as well. This area was and remains very forested, but in the early part of the 1900s, there was no oversight, and entire swaths of land were cleared for timber. At the time of this story, many of the jobs in the area were associated with logging. That's true even now. One of the people who made a life here was Vicki Jo Dodd Silves. She was born June 17, 1953 in Juneau, Alaska, and according to family, she was sharp and reliable and kind. She graduated from Juneau Douglas High School in 1971 and later moved south to Washington, finding work with Ground Pacific Company out of Lyman, Washington at an accounting firm that served local logging companies. Lyman is a small town very close to Concrete as well. Friends say Vicki was beautiful, quick to laugh, and dependable. She could also be particular, and according to her husband John, she had a bit of a jealous streak. So the events of this case unfold around the holidays. On the night of December 6th, 1997, her office held a small holiday party. Just 5 people in the group, supposedly just employees from the Ground Pacific Company. There's no public documentation of the names of those coworkers or if anyone else that wasn't an employee attended this party. The information that I do have indicates this party was held at a private home and not a bar or restaurant or a public space. I don't know if this should stand out to us. A holiday party on a Sunday at someone's house. Again, it was a small group, so maybe it was a spontaneous party that wasn't really formal for a holiday party like you would imagine. There are only a few places in this town, in downtown Concrete, even now, that you could choose from, so maybe there weren't a lot of places to go. There were drinks and music. It sounded like a good time. It did sound casual. Again, it makes sense for a small-knit group. One coworker, Richard Brink, later told police he offered to walk Vicki home later in the evening, partly because she'd been drinking and partly because she was within walking distance of her home. This area is extremely dark. No sidewalks or street lights like you would picture in a neighborhood. It was the middle of December, which means it gets dark at 4:50 in the afternoon here, and it can be really cold and rainy. We have daylight savings time in Washington like most states, but it starts in November, and by 5 p.m. in November through December, it is dark. Brink said that once at her house, they started to make out. At this point, he said she would be sort of accepting to him being there and affectionate one minute, then switch to aggression the next. Honestly, it sounds a little like we all have the potential to get when we've been tired and have had too much to drink. So, can't hold it against her at all. But he described her as erratic and angry. He claimed he grew uncomfortable and he left her alone unharmed at 1:15 a.m. His roommate, a man named Ray Valentin, confirmed he came home around 1:30 a.m. So if this is accurate, that would be a 15-minute window between Richard Brink leaving and getting home, depending on his walking speed. It's also enough time for something to happen that he didn't mention. What we know for certain is that it was the last time anyone admitted seeing Vicki alive. Given the remote area, that isn't saying too much in terms of the unlikely possibility that someone might happen to see her late at night. These homes were on a highway, but it wouldn't be busy at night. And even so, no one would have seen her in the dark before or after her death. That aspect sort of strengthens my personal opinion that she knew whoever did this. At the time of her murder, Vicki was living in this home alone. She was separated from her husband, John Silves. They originally moved to Concrete together, but they were sort of in this tenuous reconciliation period, and John would occasionally stay with her just for a few days and nights and then drive back to Port Angeles where he was living. He would usually leave on Sunday. It had been about 3 weeks since he had been there, so this weekend she was all alone. The next morning was Monday, December 7th, and Vicki didn't arrive at work, and I'm assuming that's probably around 8 a.m. Her manager tried to contact her by phone, and when she couldn't reach her, she sent a coworker to check on her. At this time, cell phones were not a thing, so it would have been a landline call. Vicki was a very reliable person, so it was extremely out of character for her not to show up, or even with a hangover not answer her phone. I imagine they probably just thought she overslept after drinking at the party that they were all at the night before. I'm not sure how much time passed after the first call before they sent someone to check on her. I don't even know if they called her multiple times. I imagine they probably did. Just for context, it's not exactly clear who found her since I couldn't obtain any case records, but a road crew member was sent to check on her. These are the employees who maintain the logging roads even when there's no active logging going on. Maybe they sort of sit around in an office. Maybe that's kind of what they were up to that day. Again, if you sent someone on a road crew, you wouldn't be contacting them by cell phone. This is all in-person discussion, probably took place, and someone must have volunteered to drive to her house. That is when Vicki was found. Vicki was found lying in her driveway in a pool of blood. It wasn't clear at the time how she died, but later the coroner reports noted cause of death as exsanguination due to multiple incisions to the neck. In other words, stab wounds to the neck with blood loss ultimately leading to her death. I don't know if there was a weapon nearby or anything else at the scene, as this has all been kept out of the media and never released to the public, but I do seem to think that some of the records did say that there was no weapon at the scene. She had no obvious defensive wounds. Some reports from the scene say that her front door stood partly open about 6 to 8 inches and all of her lights were on, and her shoes were 20 feet away, even though she was in her driveway. How far into the driveway did she fall? I don't know. It could have been a few steps or way out in the middle of the driveway. This is just all speculation. With the minimal amount of information that I had, the shoes being 20 feet away sort of stood out to me. I'm not really sure why that would have made the reports that hit the media and made public. Also, the detail about the company having a party on a Sunday night seems a little bit odd. I'm not sure why we would want to have a late night party with alcohol before starting work on Monday. So maybe it was just sort of a relaxed environment. But those are two things that kind of stand out to me as a little bit strange. So it brings me back to thinking the party was just sort of spontaneous. It was a get-together, maybe called a holiday party. Sometimes work friends just get together before people travel for the holidays, and Sunday was maybe the only day that worked for everybody before everybody went on vacation and took flights home for the holidays. Maybe it wasn't a Christmas party like we imagine, with punch and cookies and mistletoe. Maybe it was just a quick get-together, maybe a Christmas bonus thing. I know those can happen, but without the case records, it's all just a guess. The shoe detail is strange, though. I spoke to John Silves, and he said her favorite shoes at the time were clogs. I remember how popular clogs were in the 90s, too. I had a pair. They were really easy to slip on. If someone came to your house, you would definitely choose a slip-on shoe over a sneaker. Some believe she took her shoes off after returning home, a habit when she settled in. Others think she might have dropped them when she stepped outside to see who'd pulled into the driveway, which could easily happen with a clog. Or maybe she kicked them off in panic, or they were knocked loose if someone grabbed her from behind. I don't know if there were drag marks or the gravel was intact or disturbed. There is no way to know unless the police release some information. So whoever did this was fast, close, and quiet with no defensive wounds on Vicki. Whoever came to that house, she probably didn't feel threatened by if she went outside to investigate. For most people that know this case, they agree that this was likely someone that she knew, someone that she was familiar with. We do know she was ambushed and likely didn't see it coming. Leaving her house to investigate a car or a sound in her driveway, maybe she thought it was Richard Brink coming back, the guy that had walked her home. But if it was a car, it probably wasn't him because I believe they came on foot. It's possible someone honked in the driveway and that noise brought her outside as well. Again, you just don't know why Vicki went outside and why she left her door open and all of her lights on. It doesn't sound like she was planning on going anywhere. The coworker who found her was immediately shocked and overwhelmed by the sight of a dead friend in the driveway, and this person covered her with a blanket before police arrived, an act of kindness that unfortunately contaminated the scene. Investigators noted no forced entry, no robbery, no sexual assault, and nothing obviously missing. Whether this matters at all, where did the person get the blanket to cover her up with? Was it from their own car? Did they go into Vicki's house? That seems a little risky if you're worried the killer could still be around. Or did Vicki come out with a blanket around her shoulders the night before, just to investigate, and it was dropped? Again, this home is pretty far away from any major activity. There is one crime scene photo online that I was able to find. It had some yellow tape in the photo, and you can see that on a Google search. The driveway is sort of muddy gravel and it curves around towards the house once you pull in. If someone pulled up, she would most definitely have heard the gravel and seen lights shining through her window. And if you walked in the dark, it might even be hard to see the type of car that was parked there with the lights shining in her face. Vicki's husband, John Silves, lived 200 plus miles away in Port Angeles at the time. They were separated but still legally married. I was able to briefly speak to John on the phone for this case. John said that they were trying to reconcile prior to her death. I mentioned this a little earlier in the show, but to expound on it, he would drive from Port Angeles at the beginning of the week and stay with Vicki, and then return home on Sundays. so he could watch football with his roommates. I think he may have had a 7-on, 7-off weekly truck driving schedule that was able to accommodate him staying at Vicki's place for days at a time. John said he received a knock on his door at 2 a.m. that woke him up on the day that she was found, and it was the Skagit County police. They notified John of her death. As usual, and typical for good reason, John became the prime suspect. In almost all murdered or missing people cases, the spouse or significant other is usually the focus of interest and like 90% of the perpetrators of the crime. John was never charged with anything associated with Vicki's death. He says his DNA was taken twice. The second time was 2 years after the murder. He passed a polygraph. He was finally cleared. Fortunately for John, he had a time-stamped receipt for cigarettes during the murder window, and his work schedule had not been interrupted in any way that would allow him to carry out a crime so far away. His roommate at the time vouched for his presence as well. John has always maintained that he had nothing to do with it. Always. He is still fighting for answers, but has been given no information from law enforcement at all. He feels like there should be more leads and progress, and that effort has been disproportionate to the severity of the crime. This was a small group and a small town. Someone must know something. John says Vicki was a good person, but she could be jealous. He recalls the last time he saw her about 2 to 3 weeks before she was killed, and they had been in a fight. He said Vicki had accused him of infidelity, which he denied. He remembers pulling out of her driveway and seeing her in the rearview mirror waving goodbye. He said he was so mad at the time, he just peeled out of the driveway and drove back to Port Angeles. He didn't know that would be the last time he saw her alive. John to this day has held on to his own theory that Vicki discovered something at her work as the accountant she wasn't supposed to see, involving the theft of cedar. She was silenced permanently so the crime wouldn't be exposed. This was driven by a letter that he received. Not long after the murder, a typed letter arrived at John's mother's house. It claimed that cedar theft was happening inside the logging company and that Vicki knew too much. Both John and his mother handled the letter before turning it over to police. When I spoke to John, he told me the letter contained details he didn't feel comfortable repeating or sharing, and he didn't offer to share the letter with me. The police at the time quickly discounted the letter as sort of a red herring and never released it publicly. Here is just a sentence from the letter. Vicki was working for an accounting firm that covered up cedar theft from the company. She found out too much and talked to the wrong people. You should know this wasn't random. So it sounds like the motive was money and timber. The question is, were we talking about logging company books like embezzling or actual theft of trees like a bigger operation? I spoke to a law enforcement friend about the case, and he said that logging federal land without a permit or a permission actually happens all the time. Most logging happens on privately owned but designated logging land, permitted. It can abut government and protected forests as well as protected trees and species of trees, and you are not allowed to log these areas without a permit, permission. It's illegal. People overlog and even cut down protected species of trees. If that were happening and the actual trees were being sold, it would be hard to trace and be worth a small fortune. You would need to be using the legitimate logging company's equipment to pull this off and then move it out of the system and sell it privately. That would be all profit, no cost to the criminal. There's just so much room for corruption in this field of work. The other thing would be just stealing money from the company, maybe writing checks or borrowing funds and not returning it. I know people can be pretty creative about stealing and hiding money from companies, especially when there's very little oversight, and especially if you're in charge of balancing the books. I got a little into this cedar theft idea, and I did a little bit of research on price and what kind of money this might generate. And I'll break it down about how cedar theft and exploiting natural resources can and always will be extremely lucrative. And to be clear, this isn't just a few $1,000s we're talking about. An old growth cedar tree and they don't really exist anymore because they were all logged over here in Washington, could yield about 500 board feet of cedar. A second growth cedar, which is usually what you see, or even third growth, can yield about 150 board feet. So one tree is worth anywhere between $500 to $1,000 in materials. Have you ever seen a logging truck full of trees on the freeway? It can have 20 to 40 cut trees. That's $40,000 plus you do that 30 truckloads of trees and divert that, and you are looking at $1.2 million. People have been killed for so much less money than that. So money and greed are definitely huge drivers when it comes to murder, but the letter is hard to authenticate. It referenced details about the scene that hadn't been public. Whether the letter was genuine, a warning, or a distraction, no one really knows. I guess the question would be, why send it at all if it was an inside job? And I guess that could be maybe guilt, maybe control, maybe someone wanted to shift suspicion away from themselves. Especially after so long, the letter came almost 18 months after Vicki was murdered. John also said it was sent to his mom and not him. I asked why they didn't send to his address, and he thinks there was just no way to find where he was living. It was the 90s. The internet was just a fraction of its power today, so you couldn't just type a name and find a person on social media. You were looking in phone books and relying on memory and last names. John remembers his aunt got a call asking for his mother's address before the letter arrived, and the aunt provided an old address because she didn't know about a move. Sounds like the letter was forwarded from an old address to John's mom's new address, and that leads me to think that someone was just trying to find someone else by calling around like we did in the 90s. Nearly 2 decades later, Vicki's case reemerged in an unexpected place: television. In 2016, the Travel Channel show The Dead Files aired an episode called The Whispering, Concrete, Washington. In it, retired homicide detective Steve DeShavi and psychic medium Amy Allen investigated a home where residents reported abnormal and paranormal activity. During this episode, DeShavi uncovered a local unsolved murder, and it was the 1997 killing of Vicki Silves. Amy Allen, the medium, described sensing a woman who had been attacked outside her home, which matched some of the case details. DeShavi then cited real reports naming Vicki Silves and even showed archival photos. For many viewers, it was the first time they'd heard her name. But while the show revived awareness, it didn't produce any new evidence. And like these sort of shows do, it blurred lines between fact and speculation. And of course, like with so many of these shows and entertainment, the mystery remained unsolved when the credits rolled. The most interesting part for me was there was a historian in the area, area.Sources, featured on the show, and he was able to get 40 pages of Vicki's case file, and he shared this with DeShavi. I wasn't able to reach anyone on the show about obtaining these documents, and the Skagit County Police Department denied my request as the case is still open, though it is listed as cold. I even located Eric Strashein online and sent him an email just to be sure he was the correct Eric, and I haven't heard back. It was during this clip with DeShavi that we see the cause of death for Vicki. This particular episode invited John Silves back to Vicki's property, and John was allowed only a few sentences in the episode, and they did not allow him to share the letter, although he is seen holding it during the episode. John says he hasn't been back to Concrete since that recording in 2016. After decades, 3 main theories survive: a crime of passion by someone she knew, a cover-up tied to company theft and possible corruption, or a random attack, though there were no signs of robbery or sexual assault. The physical evidence was limited: multiple wounds, no weapon recovered, no DNA hits. The early contamination made later testing difficult, and in a county with limited resources, the case quietly froze and sort of disappeared. The shoes, the letter, nothing ever really led anywhere. This case has definitely been neglected. When I requested records from Skagit County Sheriff's Office, the answer was simple: the case is still open and exempt from disclosure under Washington's Public Records Act. Legally correct, But for family, this is just a cruel roadblock for a seemingly cold case. Key people in this case are already dying. Richard Brink died in 2003 at the age of 47 of a heart attack. The longer this case sits here and people close to the case die, the less likely it is for Vicki to get justice. Something has to give. Concrete isn't a dangerous town, but it carries an uneasy history. Beyond Vicki's case, there are other disappearances and unsolved deaths in the Upper Skagit Valley. For locals, the question isn't whether bad things happen here, it's why they're so frequent and why they don't get the attention they deserve. That's what I hope we can help with in a small way with this podcast. I think what bothers me the most about this story is how quickly a woman's life can just vanish from the headlines while a killer walks free. And I have no doubt someone still alive knows something. Or for all we know, he's died with the secret. There has not been a single advancement in this case for 28 years. It's a little suspicious. Maybe they don't have a lot more information than we know about, but John says he has not heard anything about the case. Is there nothing that can be tested at this point? No DNA advancements? No cold case detective looking into this? I just don't think this was random. This town is so small, it had to have been someone familiar to her. It wasn't sexually motivated. This was a direct and intentional act to keep Vicki quiet. Vicki Silves was more than a cold case number. She was a daughter, a wife, independent, bright, and deeply loved. Today, she rests at Kalama Cemetery in Skagit County, Washington, a quiet place surrounded by fields and sky. Her story deserves to be remembered, and her family deserves the truth. If you know anything about the murder of Vicki Silves, please contact the Skagit County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit. I'll link the case number and the Skagit County contact info in the notes. Again, I'm Andrea, and this is Dark Tourism, The Forgotten Files, the story of Vicki Silves. Come back next week for another forgotten story from Washington State.